poor African cried when she married the old Arab executive, but her honeymoon left her terrified. She never imagined that her life would take such a turn. From the dusty roads of a small African village to the golden palaces of a billionaire Arab executive, her fate was sealed the moment her family made the impossible choice. She cried at the altar, feeling trapped in a nightmare. Married to a much older man, she thought her future would be filled with suffering and despair. But when they left for their honeymoon, something happened that left her completely terrified. Was this man truly the monster she feared? Or was there a secret hidden behind the wealth and power that could change everything? Stay until the end to uncover the shocking truth behind this unbelievable story. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring you more shocking and emotional stories that will leave you speechless. Now, let's begin. The dry wind carried the scent of dust and desperation as Amina stood barefoot in the middle of her family's small hut. The clay walls, barely holding together, seemed to shrink around her as her mother adjusted the worn-out headscarf over her dark, trembling curls. "You must do this for us," her mother whispered, her voice breaking. Amina's chest tightened. She was only 22, yet her fate had already been sealed. The decision was never hers to make. Her father had spoken, and his words were law. She was to marry Sheikh Khalid al-Rahman, a man 5 decades older than her, a man she had never met, and a man whose wealth stretched beyond imagination. Tears burned in her eyes. How could her father sell her like cattle? "This is not marriage," she muttered under her breath. "It's a contract." Her mother flinched at her words, but she said nothing. What could she say? Their family was drowning in debt. The small farm had dried up, and the only thing they had left to offer was her. The news had spread like wildfire through the village. Amina, the girl who was to marry a billionaire. Some whispered she was lucky. A life of gold, silk, and power awaited her. Others pitied her, knowing that such a man would never truly love her, only possess her. The wedding took place inside an ornate marble palace that looked more like something out of a dream than real life. Tall pillars stretched into the sky, golden chandeliers shimmered above, and guests dressed in the finest silk whispered behind delicate hands. Amina felt nothing but numbness. She stood at the altar in a gown too heavy for her small frame, the weight of the embroidered fabric only adding to the suffocation she already felt inside. And then he entered. Sheikh Khalid. His presence was commanding, not because he was handsome, but because he was powerful. His white beard was neatly trimmed, his sharp brown eyes calculating. A man who was used to taking what he wanted. His gaze swept over her, as if assessing a purchase, and the sick feeling in Amina's stomach only deepened. The vows were said. The rings were exchanged. And when the moment came to kiss, Sheikh Khalid merely touched her cheek with cold fingers and murmured, "You are mine now." Tears spilled down her face. The guests applauded, and just like that, her life no longer belonged to her. As the night fell, a convoy of luxury cars arrived at the palace gates. It was time. The honeymoon awaited. Her heart pounded as they drove through the city, her hands twisting the golden bangles around her wrists. The farther they went, the more she realized they weren't heading to any known resort or destination. A strange fear settled in her bones. Sheikh Khalid remained silent beside her, his fingers drumming against the armrest. And then she saw it. A private airstrip. Amina's breath caught in her throat. A jet was waiting. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Khalid finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. To a place where no one can hear you scream. Amina's blood turned to ice. The car stopped. The doors unlocked. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The honeymoon had just begun. Amina's pulse pounded in her ears as she stepped out of the luxury car, her legs unsteady beneath her. The private jet stood before her like a beast waiting to swallow her whole. The words Sheikh Khalid had just spoken echoed in her mind. To a place where no one can hear you scream. She shivered, gripping the silk of her wedding dress as she forced herself to breathe. Surely he was just testing her. Or maybe it was some cruel joke. But his face remained unreadable, and that terrified her even more. A tall man in a black suit opened the jet's door. Khalid gestured for her to enter, his ringed fingers heavy with expectation. Amina hesitated, glancing at the night sky. Run! The thought was foolish. Where would she go? She was miles from home, trapped in a world of wealth and power she didn't understand. There was no escape, not now, not ever. Swallowing her fear, she climbed the steps into the aircraft. The interior was more luxurious than anything she had ever seen. Polished mahogany, golden accents, plush leather seats, but all Amina could feel was the weight of her chains. Sheikh Khalid sat across from her as the engines roared to life. His sharp brown eyes watched her carefully, as if he were studying his new possession. Drink, he offered, lifting a crystal glass of dark amber liquid. Amina shook her head. She barely trusted the air she breathed, let alone anything he would give her. His lips curled in a knowing smirk. You're afraid. She held his gaze, refusing to answer. If she showed weakness, he would use it against her. Silence settled between them as the plane lifted into the sky, the city lights fading beneath them. Amina clenched her hands in her lap, wondering where he was taking her. Hours passed. Sleep was impossible. Then she noticed something. They weren't flying over a city anymore. Nothing but endless desert stretched beneath them. Her stomach twisted. The jet finally landed on a private airstrip in the middle of nowhere. The doors opened, and hot desert air rushed inside, thick with mystery. A convoy of blacked-out SUVs waited on the tarmac. Khalid rose from his seat, adjusting his white robe. Come. Amina's feet refused to move. Where are we? She whispered. For the first time, he smiled, and somehow that scared her even more. You will see. Amina had no choice but to follow. The moment she stepped onto the hot ground, two men in dark suits and sunglasses flanked her. Guards. Prison. The SUVs took off into the desert, the tires kicking up dust as they drove through the endless golden dunes. There were no roads, only silence. Amina dared a glance at Khalid. He seemed at ease, his fingers lazily tapping against the window. Minutes turned to hours. The deeper they went, the heavier the fear sat in her chest. And then, in the distance, something massive emerged from the dunes. A fortress. An ancient palace, hidden in the heart of the desert. Tall sandstone walls, guarded gates and towers loomed ahead, a kingdom lost in time. Amina's heart hammered. She wasn't being taken to a honeymoon resort. She was being taken somewhere no one could find her. The gates groaned open. The convoy entered, and the doors slammed shut behind them. Amina turned to Khalid, panic rising. Why are we here? He leaned in close, his voice a whisper against her ear. Because, my dear wife, your new life begins now. Amina's breath hitched. This was no honeymoon. This was captivity. The SUV rolled to a stop inside the towering stone fortress, and Amina's stomach clenched. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, her breath shallow and erratic. This was not a honeymoon. This was something else entirely. The massive doors of the courtyard slammed shut behind them, sealing her inside this unfamiliar world. The palace was unlike anything she had ever seen. Ancient, yet untouched by time. Intricate carvings decorated the walls, massive archways stretched toward the heavens, and fountains of crystal-clear water glistened under the dim glow of lanterns. But it wasn't the beauty of the place that sent chills down Amina's spine. It was the silence. No staff, no guests, no escape. Sheikh Khalid stepped out first, adjusting the gold rings on his fingers. The guards flanking Amina didn't move until he spoke. "Take her to the East Wing." Amina stiffened. The East Wing? Before she could protest, two towering men in black suits took her by the arms, not forcefully, but with absolute control. "Khalid!" she gasped, twisting against their grip. "Tell me what's happening! Where are you taking me?" He barely glanced at her as he adjusted his cufflinks. "You will be safe there." "Safe?" she repeated, her panic spiking. "I don't need to be safe. I need to leave." He finally turned to face her. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held none of the gentleness she had once hoped for. Only authority. Only ownership. "This is your home now." Amina shook her head violently. "No, this isn't what we agreed." "We agreed that you would be my wife," Khalid interrupted, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "And a wife obeys her husband." Amina's breath caught in her throat. Obeys. The word rattled inside her mind like a death sentence. Before she could argue, the guards pulled her forward, guiding her through the endless halls of the fortress. The corridors stretched on forever, the walls adorned with massive golden-framed paintings of past rulers, their piercing eyes following her every step. Every door they passed was locked. Finally, they reached a massive wooden door. One of the guards pulled it open, revealing a grand chamber. Amina's eyes darted around. A luxurious canopy bed covered in silk sheets, a golden vanity, a marble bathtub so large it could fit 5 people. It was a room fit for a queen. But it was a cage. Amina spun around to face the guards. "You can't keep me here." Neither man reacted. "Please," she begged, her voice raw with desperation. "I just want to go home." One of them finally spoke. "This is your home now." The door slammed shut. Amina ran to it instantly, pounding her fists against the heavy wood. "Let me out," she cried. "Please." Silence. The finality of it crashed over her. She was alone. She staggered back, her breaths uneven. Her mind screamed at her to do something, to find a way out. She searched the room, looking for a hidden door, an open window, anything, nothing. A single high window let in the moonlight, but it was impossible to reach. She was truly trapped. She collapsed onto the bed, her body trembling. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to cry. Crying wouldn't save her. Then a thought struck her. Why? Why would Khalid bring her here? What did he truly want? Amina swallowed hard. And what would happen when he finally came to claim her? Her skin turned cold. As if the universe had heard her thoughts, the door creaked open. Amina's head snapped up. Sheikh Khalid stood in the doorway, his silhouette tall and menacing against the dim candlelight. "Are you comfortable, my wife?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Amina's body locked in place. She didn't answer. Khalid stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. And for the first time, she realized that the real nightmare had only just begun. Amina's breath caught in her throat as Sheikh Khalid shut the door behind him. The heavy sound of the latch clicking into place sent a shiver down her spine. He moved slowly, his expensive white robe flowing as he stepped closer. She forced herself to stand, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Khalid tilted his head slightly, as if amused by her question. "You are my wife," he said simply. "What do you think I want?" Her stomach clenched. She had feared this moment since the wedding. He had taken her away from everything she knew, locked her in this palace, and now he had come to claim what he believed was his. She took a step back, her hands trembling at her sides. "You don't own me." His dark eyes narrowed. "Don't I?" Amina's pulse raced. She had never felt so powerless. In her village, she had no wealth, no status, but she had always had her freedom. Here, in this golden cage, she was nothing more than a possession. Khalid exhaled, his expression unreadable. Then, to her shock, he turned away from her and walked toward the grand vanity against the far wall. He reached for a small silver tray and poured a dark amber liquid into a crystal glass. "I understand why you're afraid," he said, swirling the drink in his hand. "You think I will hurt you." Amina's throat was dry, but she refused to speak. He took a slow sip before continuing. "Tell me, Amina, do you know why you are here?" Her jaw tightened. "Because my father sold me to you." Khalid chuckled, shaking his head. "Your father did what he believed was best for your family." He turned to face her again, setting the glass down. "But that is not why you are here." Her breath hitched. "Then why?" Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Khalid studied her for a long moment before he finally spoke. "You are here because I chose you." Amina frowned. "Chose me?" He nodded. "I had many options. Women from powerful families, women raised to be queens, but I did not want them." She swallowed hard. "Why me?" Khalid's gaze darkened. "Because you remind me of someone." The words sent a chill through her. There was something strange about the way he said it, something unsettling. She shook her head. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," he interrupted. "Not yet." Her hands curled into fists. "You think I should be grateful? That because you picked me, I should accept this life?" Khalid stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I think," he said slowly, "that you should stop fighting a battle you cannot win." Amina lifted her chin. "And if I don't?" A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. "Then you will learn the hard way." Her skin crawled. The air between them felt suffocating. Then, without warning, Khalid turned and walked toward the door. He pulled it open and glanced over his shoulder. "You will stay in this room until I say otherwise. Everything you need is here." Amina's stomach twisted. "And if I try to leave?" His eyes darkened. "Don't." And with that, he was gone. The door closed with a heavy finality, the lock clicking back into place. Amina staggered back, her hands flying to her mouth. She wasn't just a wife, she was a prisoner. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the bed, her mind racing. Who was this woman Khalid spoke of? Why did she remind him of her? Amina's eyes darted to the windows. The high stone walls outside told her what she already knew. Escape was impossible. But one thing was certain. She would not surrender to this life. No matter what it took, she would find a way out. The hours dragged on, each second stretching endlessly as Amina sat by the high window, staring at the desert beyond the fortress walls. She had tried everything. The doors were locked, the windows impossible to reach, and the guards stationed outside didn't respond to her pleas. She was truly trapped. Her mind kept replaying Khalid's words. "You remind me of someone." Who was she to him? Some replacement for a lost love? A ghost of a past mistake? The thought made her stomach turn. She forced herself to stand, pacing the room, searching for anything. A weapon, a weak spot in the walls, something she could use. The room was designed for comfort, but not for escape. Every detail was carefully crafted to keep her in place. Her eyes landed on the heavy furniture. If she could move the vanity beneath the window, maybe she could climb high enough to see what lay beyond the walls. Maybe there was a way out. Amina rushed to the vanity, her fingers curling around its edges. She pulled with all her strength, her muscles straining, but the solid wood barely shifted. Frustrated, she tried again, pushing from another angle, desperation fueling her. A sharp knock at the door froze her in place. She spun around, heart pounding as the handle turned. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and a woman entered. Amina blinked in surprise. She had expected one of the guards, maybe even Khalid himself, but this was different. The woman was dressed in a deep red silk gown, her long dark hair braided down her back. She was older, perhaps in her late 40s, with piercing brown eyes that held no warmth. "My name is Layla," the woman said, closing the door behind her. "I am here to prepare you." Amina frowned. Prepare me for what? Layla's gaze swept over the room before settling on Amina. For tonight. A cold dread settled in Amina's chest. I don't understand. Layla sighed, stepping closer. The sheikh will expect you to be presentable, clean, dressed properly. Amina took a step back, shaking her head. No, I am not his possession. Layla tilted her head. Aren't you? Anger flared in Amina's chest. Why are you helping him? Do you serve him like the others? Layla's lips curled into something that was neither a smile nor a frown. I do what I must to survive. Amina swallowed hard. And what happens if I refuse? Layla hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he will come for you anyway. And it will be worse. Amina felt her knees weaken. Her entire body tensed with fear, but something deep inside her burned with resistance. She would not be broken. Layla stepped toward the closet and pulled out a shimmering gold dress, laying it on the bed. You will wear this. You will bathe. And when the sheikh comes, you will listen. Amina clenched her fists. And if I don't? Layla met her gaze, her voice quieter this time. Then you will suffer, like the ones before you. Amina's breath hitched. The ones before me? But Layla didn't answer. She simply turned and walked toward the door. Before she left, she glanced back over her shoulder. Be smart, Amina. The door closed behind her, leaving Amina standing in the middle of the room, staring at the golden dress as if it were a chain waiting to be fastened around her throat. Her mind raced. Who were the women before her? What had happened to them? And if she didn't escape soon, would she share their fate? Amina sat frozen on the edge of the bed, staring at the shimmering gold dress laid out before her. The fabric glowed under the dim lantern light, but to her, it might as well have been shackles. Every fiber of her being screamed no. No to this dress, no to this life, no to Sheikh Khalid. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheets beneath her. Be smart, Amina. That was what Layla had said before leaving. But what did that mean? To obey? To play along? To survive? Her heart pounded as she glanced toward the locked door. She had no choice but to wait. And yet, waiting meant surrender. Slowly, she rose to her feet and approached the vanity mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, a girl who no longer belonged to herself. Her once bright eyes were now filled with fear. Her lips, dry and chapped from the desert air, pressed together in defiance. She was not this weak, broken thing. She refused to be. A sudden noise outside the door made her flinch. Heavy footsteps, voices murmuring in Arabic. Then silence. She had minutes, maybe seconds. Her mind raced. If she put on the dress, she'd be playing the game. But if she refused, Khalid would take what he wanted anyway. She needed a plan. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for something, anything, that could help. Her eyes landed on the heavy golden candlestick sitting on the bedside table. A weapon. She rushed toward it, gripping the cool metal in her hands. It was heavier than she expected, solid enough to do damage. Could she fight him off? Could she escape? Before she could think further, the lock clicked. Amina spun around, heart hammering. The door swung open, and Sheikh Khalid entered, his presence sucking the air from the room. He wore a flowing white robe, the scent of rich oud trailing behind him. His expression was unreadable, his dark eyes sharp as they fell upon her. He noticed the untouched dress on the bed, the way she stood tense, gripping the candlestick. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "You think you can fight me?" Amina's grip tightened. "I will not let you take what isn't yours." Khalid chuckled, stepping further inside, closing the door behind him. "You are my wife, Amina. Everything you are belongs to me." A chill ran down her spine, but she lifted her chin. "I do not belong to anyone." His smirk faded. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed, running a hand over his beard. "You are strong. I expected this." Amina's fingers twitched around the candlestick. "Let me go." Khalid stepped closer. She raised the weapon slightly, but he didn't seem fazed. If anything, he looked amused. "You misunderstand me, Amina." His voice was softer now, but no less dangerous. "I did not bring you here to break you," she scoffed. "Then why am I locked inside a palace in the middle of the desert?" His eyes darkened. "For your protection." Amina faltered. "Protection?" Khalid's jaw tightened. "There are things you do not know, enemies you do not see." She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He took another step forward, lowering his voice. "You were not chosen at random. I have watched you for a long time." Amina's stomach twisted. "Watched me?" "I know everything about you, your family, your village, the debts your father could never repay." He studied her carefully. "But more than that, I know who you look like." Amina's skin prickled. "Who?" For the first time, Khalid hesitated. A flicker of something, pain, crossed his face. Then he said a name Amina had never heard before. But whoever she was, She had haunted Khalid's past, and somehow Amina was caught in the middle of it. Amina's breath caught in her throat. The way Khalid said that name, it was not just a whisper from his past. It was a wound, raw and unhealed. She tightened her grip on the candlestick. Who was she? Khalid didn't answer right away. He walked toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lost in the endless dunes outside. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint sound of the wind against the stone walls. Finally, he spoke. Her name was Samira. The name meant nothing to Amina, and yet, the way he said it, it meant everything to him. She was my wife, Khalid continued, his voice lower now, almost distant. Years ago. Amina's fingers twitched around the metal in her hands. And what happened to her? Khalid turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the shadow in his eyes. She was taken from me. Amina felt a strange chill creep down her spine. Taken? His jaw tightened. Murdered. The air in the room turned heavier, suffocating. She blinked, trying to process the information. And I remind you of her? Khalid turned fully now, stepping closer. You are not just similar. His eyes traced her face, intense and unwavering. You are identical. Amina's heart skipped a beat. That's impossible. But something in her gut twisted. She had always known she was different from the others in her village. Her features, her complexion, her sharp cheekbones, they never quite matched. People whispered that she looked like she came from somewhere else. Her father never spoke of her mother. Could it be? No. It was too insane. Khalid studied her reaction carefully. You were not sold to me, Amina. You were chosen. Her pulse pounded in her ears. For what? Khalid's lips parted, as if he were about to say something that could change everything. Then, a loud bang echoed through the fortress. Amina jumped. Khalid snapped his head toward the door, his entire body tensing. Footsteps, shouts, gunfire. The guards outside yelled in Arabic. More gunshots. A deep, unfamiliar voice boomed through the halls. They found us, Khalid muttered under his breath. Amina's stomach twisted. Who? Khalid turned back to her, his face hard, his eyes dark with something she hadn't seen before. Fear. He strode toward her in 2 quick steps, grabbing her wrist. No time to explain. We have to leave. Amina yanked her arm back. Leave? I'm not going anywhere with you. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me, Amina. If they take you, you will beg to be back in this room. Her blood ran cold. The walls shook as another explosion echoed through the palace. The door burst open, and Layla appeared, breathless, eyes wide with urgency. They're inside, she said, her voice sharp. We have to go. Now. Khalid didn't hesitate. He grabbed Amina's hand and dragged her toward the secret passage hidden behind the bookshelf. And as they disappeared into the darkness, Amina realized her nightmare was only beginning. The secret passage was narrow and cold, the stone walls pressing in as Khalid pulled Amina through the dark tunnel. Behind them, the sound of gunfire and shouting grew louder. Amina's heart pounded. Who are they? She whispered. Khalid didn't slow down. People who want you dead. She stumbled, nearly falling. Me? They think you are her. Her breath caught. Samira, the dead wife. Layla led the way, moving quickly through the passage. There's a car waiting beyond the dunes. We have minutes. Amina fought to keep up. She wanted to run in the opposite direction, but she knew the truth. If Khalid was afraid, then these men were worse. The tunnel opened into the night. The desert stretched wide before them. A black SUV sat idling, its headlights off. Khalid pushed Amina inside. "Drive," he ordered the man behind the wheel. As the car sped into the night, flames erupted behind them. The fortress burned, shadows of men moving inside. Amina clenched her fists. She didn't trust Khalid. She didn't trust Layla. But she had no choice. And somehow she knew this was far from over. They drove for hours. No one spoke. Finally, the car slowed near an abandoned village. Khalid turned to her. "We will be safe here for now." Amina's voice was sharp. "Safe from who? Tell me the truth." Khalid exhaled, his shoulders tense. "My enemies. Samira's enemies. And now, yours." She shook her head. "I don't even know who she was." He studied her. "But they think you do." The words sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't just trapped with Khalid. She was trapped in his past. Days passed. They moved constantly, never staying in one place. Khalid was different now, not just a captor, but a man fighting a war. Amina watched him carefully. He was ruthless, but he wasn't careless. He feared losing her, just as he had lost Samira. Layla finally spoke the truth. Samira was murdered because she knew something. Something powerful men wanted buried. Amina stiffened. "And they think I know it too." Layla nodded. "If they find you, they won't ask questions." Amina's pulse raced. She had never met Samira, never heard of her. But somehow, she was the key to a secret she didn't even know. One night, under the cover of darkness, Khalid pulled Amina aside. "We can run forever," he said. "Or we can fight." She met his gaze, her heart heavy with fear. "How?" A slow smirk tugged at his lips. "By becoming someone they fear." Amina stared at him. She had been a poor village girl, a prisoner, a pawn. But now she had a choice. She could keep running, or she could become the woman they truly feared. She exhaled, lifting her chin. "Teach me." Khalid's eyes darkened with something unreadable. "Then let's begin." And with those words, Amina knew she would never be weak again.